Hey everyone, Mr. Know-It-All here. Around the middle of the 20th century, the world suddenly plunged into the most brutal war in human history. This war lasted for many years, spread across the entire globe, and caused the deaths of over 80 million people. In short, this was the moment when the entire world chose violence as the main solution. This war later went on to inspire a whole lineup of famous video games, like World of Tanks and Call of Duty, and even a very familiar movie starring idol Tom Hanks, Saving Private Ryan. Sounds kind of entertaining, but in reality, it really wasn't fun at all. Today, that war is known around the world as World War II. Wait, hold on. The world after World War I. After World War I, the Central Powers surrendered to the Allies. As a result, a series of major empires collapsed. The map of Europe was almost completely redrawn, and empires such as Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and even Russia were broken apart into many smaller countries. Austria-Hungary, in particular, ended up in an even worse situation. The empire lost parts of its territory to Italy, Poland, and Romania, and what remained was split into 4 independent countries: Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. In other words, from one massive empire, Austria-Hungary was sliced up like a cake. The Ottoman Empire didn't fare much better. After the war, it lost parts of its territory to Britain and eventually collapsed completely. The Ottoman Empire was broken apart into 6 separate entities, including Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Hejaz, Transjordan, and Palestine. In other words, from a once vast empire, the Ottomans were divided up fairly quickly and very thoroughly. Not just the Ottoman Empire, the territories of Germany and Russia were also significantly reduced. For the Russian Empire in particular, things were even more severe. The Russian Empire collapsed completely and was replaced by the Soviet state. The western territories of the Soviet state were split off into 7 countries, including Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus. By 1922, the Soviet state began reunifying its territory, merging Belarus and Ukraine, and officially changing its name to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the Soviet Union. Basically, after World War I, the map of Europe was almost completely redrawn from scratch. Germany, meanwhile, was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles and pay war reparations to Britain, France, and the United States in an enormous amount of money. If you want a deeper explanation of this part, you can check out my World War I video on the channel. But in reality at the time, the most obvious consequence was growing poverty among the population. Skyrocketing inflation pushed Germany's economy right to the edge of collapse. Money lost its value so fast that today you could buy a loaf of bread. Tomorrow, you could only look at one. For many Germans back then, the only way they saw to escape this chaos was one thing: war. And right at that moment, a figure appeared and said, "I have a solution." That man was Hitler, along with the Nazi Party. They organized large-scale public rallies, tapped directly into public anger, and promised to bring Germany back to its golden age. This strategy was terrifyingly effective. Hitler quickly took control of Germany, became the supreme leader, and from that point on, Germany's flag was replaced with the swastika, and the country officially became Nazi Germany. If you want to better understand Hitler and how he came to power, you can check out my separate video on this topic. After consolidating his power, Hitler began to rearm the nation, expand the military, and quietly pick the right moment. The goal was very clear: to start another war and take revenge for everything Germany had suffered in the previous one. Shifting to Italy. During World War I, Italy was originally an ally of Germany, but halfway through the war, Italy switched sides. Italy chose to stand with the Allied powers. The reason was fairly simple. The Allies promised that if Italy helped them win the war, Italy would receive part of Austria-Hungary's territory. It sounded like a pretty good deal. However, after the war ended, The territory Italy actually received was far less than what had been promised. To put it bluntly, Italy felt cheated. On top of that, Italy suffered heavily after the war. The economy collapsed, inflation soared, unemployment spread. Ordinary Italians lived in extreme hardship and gradually lost all faith in their government. And then, in that exact situation, a new figure emerged. His name was Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was someone who strongly opposed democracy and believed that democracy was something that only made the country weaker. According to Mussolini's ideology, a nation didn't need debate, didn't need opposition, and certainly didn't need different opinions. The people, in his view, had to sacrifice individual rights for the state, show absolute loyalty to the government, and be willing to give up even their own lives for the nation to grow stronger. If someone said, "But I don't want to sacrifice myself for the country," the answer would be, "Then you don't deserve to exist." Simple and terrifying. Mussolini then decided to shave his head, form a new political party, and name it the Fascist Party. Before entering politics, Mussolini was a journalist. And this was extremely important because he was very good at speaking to crowds, very good at writing, and especially skilled at spreading ideas to the masses. In other words, Mussolini didn't just have ideas, he knew how to sell them. Thanks to his powerful public speaking skills, Mussolini quickly attracted a large number of party members and built up significant influence. By 1922, Mussolini decided to go straight to the king and said, very simply, "I want to be prime minister." It sounded a bit blunt, but here was the problem. By this point, Mussolini's supporters were already too numerous, applying pressure everywhere. The king looked at the situation and thought, if I refuse, there's a real chance. This could lead to civil war or another revolution. And to avoid that scenario, the king had no choice but to give in. And so, on October 31st, 1922, Benito Mussolini officially became the Prime Minister of Italy. The Fascist Party, under Mussolini's leadership, quickly made a huge splash across Europe. Fascist ideology, in particular, caught the attention of one very important person. That person was Germany's leader, and he supported fascism enthusiastically. Mussolini and Hitler met, talked for a while, and realized, wait, we're actually pretty similar. And so the two of them hit it off immediately and decided to become allies. Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy officially formed an alliance, creating a new bloc known as the Axis powers. The goal of this alliance was very clear: to use war to expand their territory, shifting to Asia. On the other side of the world, the Empire of Japan was an island nation, poor in natural resources, and sushi wasn't exactly something you could export to feed an entire country. So Japan chose a different path: war. Japan used war to seize resources, expand its territory, and solve its own survival problem. During World War I, Japan took advantage of the situation to capture most of Germany's territories and islands in the Pacific. Around the same time, the Russian Empire collapsed. The Soviet state was established and later unified into the Soviet Union. Japan continued to choose war as its tool for territorial expansion. This time, Japan decided to march north. With the goal of invading the Soviet Union, it sounded very confident. But in reality, Japan got completely crushed by the Soviets. After that defeat, Japan was forced to sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. In other words, couldn't win the fight. So for now, they had to sit tight. However, Japan didn't forget about it. After getting beaten that time, Japan became deeply resentful toward the Soviet Union and determined to take revenge in the future. Japan looked around the world map and realized something. Germany and Italy had political ideologies quite similar to Japan's, and more importantly, they shared a common enemy, the Soviet Union. So Japan thought, okay, same vibe. Japan decided to join the Axis, forming an alliance with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The three countries signed an agreement, known as the Tripartite Pact. The terms were very simple. The three nations would protect one another, attack one country, and you're attacking all three. Street version. If you want to punch Japan, you have to get past Germany and Italy first, and vice versa. Back to Europe. Meanwhile, back in Europe, Hitler began openly challenging Britain and France. He deliberately violated the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, openly dismantled military restrictions, and aggressively pushed rearmament. All of this pointed toward one single goal: preparing for a new war, on a scale far larger than before. Even though Britain and France clearly understood Germany's intentions, their prime ministers were very reluctant to confront Hitler directly. They didn't want a direct clash with Nazi Germany, so they chose a very familiar solution, looking the other way. And thanks to that indifference, Hitler was free to do whatever he wanted. By this point, Hitler had turned Germany into a full-scale war machine, armed from head to toe, and ready for the next wave of invasions. 1938. The first victim, Austria. In 1938, Nazi Germany's first target was Austria. Someone panicked and ran to report, "Sir, Hitler has started invading Austria. What should we do?" The response was, let's just leave it for now. Let him take Austria first, and then we'll negotiate later." Next up, Czechoslovakia. After swallowing Austria whole, Nazi Germany didn't stop. The next target was Czechoslovakia. Once again, someone rushed in to warn, "Sir, Hitler has started attacking Czechoslovakia," and the answer was exactly the same. "Just ignore it. Surely after taking Czechoslovakia, he'll stop." And then, Poland. After finishing off Czechoslovakia, Nazi Germany began to set its sights on Poland. Once again, someone grew worried and warned, "Sir, Hitler is getting ready to attack Poland." To avoid a direct conflict with Nazi Germany, the governments of Britain and France officially adopted a policy known as appeasement. They believed Hitler's madness surely won't go that far. Minor spoiler from Mr. Know-It-All. It went very far. In reality, the policy of appeasement did nothing to calm the situation. Instead, it only encouraged Hitler to push further, allowing fascism to expand even more aggressively. Shifting to Poland. Poland had once been a country under the control of the Russian Empire. After World War I, when the Russian Empire collapsed and Germany was defeated, Poland seized the opportunity, rose up, regained its independence, and the name Poland officially returned to the world map. At first, Poland had a fairly friendly relationship with Nazi Germany. However, Hitler's military expansion and increasingly aggressive foreign policy caused the Polish government to grow deeply concerned. Nazi Germany then made a very polite request. They wanted to build a railway line straight through Poland to connect German territory with the rest of its lands. And Germany presented the choice like this: either you agree, or we'll make you agree. Poland understood one thing very clearly: it wasn't strong enough to fight Germany one-on-one. So Poland decided to ask Britain and France for help. And by pure coincidence, Britain and France were dealing with the exact same fear as Poland. And so, the three countries decided to join forces. A military alliance between Britain, France, and Poland was formed and named the Allied Powers. This move by Poland completely enraged Nazi Germany. And to deal with the problem once and for all, on August 29, 1939, Germany sent Poland an ultimatum, considered its final warning. However, Poland flatly rejected Germany's ultimatum. This response sent Hitler into a rage, and he decided to crush Poland. But sending troops to attack another country, without a reason, looked a bit awkward. So Hitler thought, no problem, I'll just create one. Staging the scene. In August 1939, along the German-Polish border, Hitler ordered his troops to carry out a series of small sabotage incidents. Then he pointed the finger and said, "You did this." The side being blamed was basically like, "What?" In reality, Hitler had staged the sabotage himself, then pinned all the blame on Poland in order to create an excuse to justify starting a war. And once everything was ready, Hitler announced, "Poland attacked first. We're just defending ourselves." the war officially begins. The confrontation between Nazi Germany and Poland officially broke out. At this point, Poland had strong faith that Britain and France, its sworn brothers, would step in to protect it. So Britain and France sent a message to Germany. Don't bully Poland. Germany read it and ignored it. And so, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany officially launched its invasion of Poland. Poland quickly found itself getting brutally crushed by Germany. Meanwhile, Britain and France decided to help their Polish brother in a very special way by watching Poland get beaten. And right next to Poland at this time was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a relatively new country back then. While the Soviets were still struggling to recover from the aftermath of World War I, Poland had taken advantage of the situation to launch its own campaign, seizing Western Ukraine and Western Belarus. In short, the Soviet Union remembered this very clearly, and they'd been holding a grudge against Poland ever since. So when Poland was getting invaded nonstop by Germany, the supreme leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, decided this is a perfect moment. In other words, take advantage of the situation and get revenge on Poland at the same time. The Soviet Union moved its troops in, invaded the rest of Poland from the east, retaking the territories that Poland had seized earlier. At this point, Poland was in a state of getting hit from every direction. In front, Germany. Behind, the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Britain and France were still just watching. So now the question is, who do you think wins? My guess? Poland was done. And sure enough, Poland collapsed. The country was split in two, one half occupied by Germany, the other half by the Soviet Union. Today, this period is often referred to as the Phony War. After dealing with Poland, Germany and the Soviet Union suddenly became neighbors, and to avoid the situation of new neighbors immediately punching each other, Hitler and Stalin decided to establish friendly diplomatic relations. After that, a round of negotiations took place between Hitler and the prime ministers of Britain and France. The message was simple. From now on, Poland is mine. Either you accept it, or we fight. And the response from the other side was just as brief. No. Shifting to the Soviet Union. On the Soviet side, Stalin wasn't sitting still either. The Soviet Union wanted to expand its influence in Northern Europe, so it demanded that smaller countries in the region allow Soviet troops to be stationed on their territory. Most countries heard this and just stayed quiet. Finland, however, flatly pushed back. That response made the Soviet Union extremely angry, and so the Soviet Union launched an invasion of Finland. After the war, Finland was defeated and lost part of its territory to the Soviet Union. As a result, the Soviet Union's influence continued to grow, and this development made Nazi Germany start to worry. Hitler feared that if the Soviet Union keeps getting stronger, sooner or later, it's going to become a serious problem. And so, Germany began taking a hostile stance toward the Soviet Union, and relations between the two countries gradually became more and more tense. Back to Germany. To prepare for a large-scale war, Germany needed to import huge amounts of raw materials, especially iron from Sweden, used to build warships, aircraft, and tanks. Realizing this, Britain decided to move to restrain Germany. The British Navy sent its ships out to blockade Germany's iron import routes in the Norwegian Sea and around Denmark. Nazi Germany wasn't about to sit still. They responded by attacking British naval vessels, and from this point on, the war officially spread into the Atlantic. The consequence was, Norway and Denmark were dragged into the conflict and started taking hits alongside Britain. Sorry, Denmark and Norway, but to protect our iron supply routes, we're going to have to invade your territory. The reaction on the other side was basically, what the foo? The outcome came very quickly. Denmark collapsed almost immediately due to the massive power imbalance between the two sides. After that, German forces continued north, to attack Norway. Britain saw this and immediately sent troops to support Norway. However, even with British forces backing it up, Norway still fell after a few months. This failure, combined with the British Prime Minister's weak appeasement policy and the inability to save Norway, caused the British public to become genuinely furious. They decided to kick him out of the Prime Minister's seat and replace him with someone else. Back to Germany. On the German side, Hitler had finished rearming the military and now was ready to shift his focus south. The next target was France. Germany's strategy looked very familiar. Send troops through the Netherlands and Belgium, then push straight into French territory. Someone asked, wait, didn't Germany use this exact move back in World War I? Hitler replied calmly, different this time. Last time we passed through. This time, we're taking it. France knew very well that war was right around the corner. But the problem was, France's military preparations were painfully slow, and that was about to become a very big problem. Britain also quickly sent troops to support France. By May 1940, Nazi Germany officially launched its invasion of the Netherlands. The result was very clear. The Netherlands collapsed almost immediately. After that, Nazi Germany moved straight toward the Belgian border, preparing to finish Belgium next. In fact, German troops marching through the Netherlands and Belgium did not come as a surprise to Britain and France. They saw it coming. While Germany and Belgium were fighting, Britain and France used the time to build a defensive line along the French-Belgian border. On paper, the plan sounded solid, but the problem was, Belgium collapsed faster than expected. Meanwhile, the British-French defensive line wasn't finished yet. Seeing that the situation wasn't looking good, British and French forces decided to take the initiative and push deep into Belgian territory to confront German troops head-on. And just like that, the war between Britain, France, and Germany officially began right on Belgian soil. In this area, British and French forces initially performed fairly well, managing to block Germany's advance. However, to the south, their defensive line was dangerously thin, especially around the Ardennes forest. The French believed that the terrain in the Ardennes was extremely rough, difficult for tanks and armored vehicles to move through, and highly vulnerable to ambushes. Based on that, they concluded, there's no way Hitler would dare risk sending his army through this forest. With that assumption, France grew overconfident and neglected the defense of the Ardennes, a decision that they were about to pay for very dearly. What France didn't realize was that marching through the Ardennes forest was actually the core of Hitler's plan. Hitler had split his forces into two groups. One group launched a major attack in Belgium to draw attention. The other quietly pushed its way through the forest. By the time France realized what was really happening, it was already too late. The German force pushing through the Ardennes split the Allied formation and then surrounded the British-French forces from behind. British and French troops were left, being chased like ducks toward the coastline. France's most elite units were destroyed or captured as prisoners of war. Meanwhile, Britain was forced to rush ships across the Channel to evacuate its soldiers back home. After this blow, German forces pressed their advantage and quickly took Paris, and losing Paris meant real disaster. France officially collapsed. What Germany failed to achieve in World War I, Hitler had now accomplished. After the Germany-France showdown, victory belonged entirely to Germany, and now, Britain was left standing alone. Hitler sent a piece of advice to the British Prime Minister. Just surrender. Save yourself the trouble. But the British Prime Minister was impressively stubborn. And when words didn't work, Hitler decided to teach Britain a lesson. The next target was crystal clear: a direct showdown between Nazi Germany and Britain. Hitler's plan was simple: use the Air Force, strike straight at London. He planned to bomb military and economic targets while also hitting civilian areas. The ultimate goal was to turn London into rubble, forcing Britain to break and surrender. By July 1940, aircraft from both sides began taking off, and the skies over Britain turned into a real battlefield. Planes chased each other, shot at each other, and crashed almost every single day. Beyond the air battles, Hitler also ordered large-scale bombing raids on London. Everyday life for the British people was completely turned upside down, running down into air raid shelters, hearing the warning sirens, then coming back up to check whether their homes were still standing. All of that became part of daily life. In that situation, King George and Queen Elizabeth made a very clear decision. They did not flee, but stayed in London, enduring the bombings alongside their people. Despite tens of thousands of people being killed and the city suffering massive destruction, the people of London showed true mental toughness. They were resilient, united, and refused to give in. That spirit gave the British military the confidence to keep standing up against Nazi Germany. Looking at the big picture, the air forces on both sides were fairly evenly matched. However, Britain had one very important advantage. When British planes were damaged, spare parts were available immediately, and repairs were done quickly. On the German side, they didn't have that convenience. A small detail, but in war, an extremely important one. Gradually, the advantage began to tilt toward Britain. The longer the fighting went on, the heavier Germany's losses became. And after some thought, Hitler was forced to make an unpleasant decision: to indefinitely suspend the plan to invade Britain. In short, the plan to defeat Britain failed. The result of the Britain-Germany showdown: a draw. Shifting to the United States. At this point, the United States was still a neutral country. Before the war broke out, the U.S. had stated very clearly, "We will never get involved in war." It sounded firm. However, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was someone who opposed fascism from the very beginning. So when the war began, even without directly entering the fighting, the United States still supplied weapons and provided economic aid to the Allied powers, to Nazi Germany. This action by the U.S. felt like nothing less than a very public provocation, and to return the favor, Nazi Germany began to sink large numbers of American cargo ships. This made it impossible for the United States to keep pretending to be neutral. The U.S. declared that it would fully support the Allied powers in the fight against the Axis. Although it still had not officially declared war directly on Germany, in reality, the United States already had one foot in the war. Shifting to the Mediterranean. Seeing his buddy Hitler scoring win after win, Mussolini thought to himself, "Well, guess it's my turn to shine." And so, Italy declared war on Britain, officially jumping into the big game. Italy's first target was British colonies in Africa. At first, Italy attacked East Africa, and this campaign went fairly smoothly. Mussolini looked at the map and thought, easy. After that, Italy decided to shift its focus to Egypt. The result? Half a success. Not a clear win, but not a total loss either. Without really learning from that, Italy then decided to attack Greece. And this time, Italy got absolutely wrecked. And it didn't stop there. Britain began to counterattack. They struck straight at Italy's naval base in the city of Taranto. The result: Italy lost 3 battleships in a single night. Clean. Brutal. In Africa, Italian forces were pushed back again and again by Britain. In the Balkans, Greece was gaining the upper hand against Italy. The overall situation was clear. Fascist Italy was on the verge of being kicked out of the war. Obviously, when compared to Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy looked not quite on the same level, or to put it more politely, kind of underpowered. And to save his Italian brother, Hitler once again had to send German troops into the Balkans to help Italy fight Greece. Once again, Germany had to carry the team. On the march down toward Greece, Nazi Germany conveniently absorbed several neighboring territories along the way. Attacked from both sides by Italy and Nazi Germany, Greece collapsed. The result? Greece fell under Nazi German control, while the Balkans were handed over to Italy. Looking at the overall situation now, the Axis powers clearly held the advantage. Germany and Italy had almost swallowed up all of Europe. Japan had nearly taken control of most of Asia. Sounds pretty good. But there was still one problem. Right between Europe and Asia, there was still one massive player that hadn't been touched yet: the Soviet Union. Hitler had, from very early on, been worried about the Soviet Union's growing influence in Europe, even though earlier, after defeating Poland, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had established friendly diplomatic relations. In reality, Hitler had already been planning for the day he would clash with Stalin. A direct clash with the Soviet Union wasn't something Nazi Germany truly wanted, but if Germany wanted to crown itself the dominant power of Europe, there was one unavoidable truth: it had to go through the Soviet Union. So Hitler decided to be blunt with Stalin. The message was simple. Right now, you have two choices. 1, you join the Axis. 2, we fight. Before this goes any further, Mr. Know-It-All would like to pause for a moment. A bit of side info about the supreme leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. Compared to Hitler, it's only fair to admit one thing: Stalin looked slightly more handsome. Stalin's political ideology was also very different from Hitler's. But when it comes to personality, stubbornness, and a deep dislike of being told what to do, these two men were alarmingly similar. Because of that, the idea that Hitler could simply pressure Stalin into obediently making a deal was basically impossible. Stalin appeared to show some interest in Hitler's proposal, but then he added, "Sure, if you want me to join, then you need to make Japan, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Finland. Call me Grandpa."
Too bad, I've already taken them.
In other words, if Hitler wanted the Soviet Union to join the Axis, the condition was the Soviet Union would replace Nazi Germany as the leader of the Axis. And of course, that was a demand Hitler would never accept. So, the whole thing ended very quickly. Hitler basically locked in an appointment to fight Stalin. From that moment on, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union officially became enemies. And that also meant something very important. The Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States suddenly shared a common enemy. Right after that, Britain and the United States announced that they would fully support the Soviet Union. In the war against Nazi Germany, the next showdown was set: the Soviet Union versus Nazi Germany. Hitler's plan sounded very familiar. Quick attack, quick victory. He planned to split his forces into 3 groups, one pushing into Ukraine, one into Belarus, and one toward the Baltic region. Then, concentrate all forces, strike straight at Moscow. The scenario in Hitler's head was simple. Once Moscow falls, everything is over. The Soviet Union will be mine. The problem was, intelligence had already warned Stalin about this plan, but Stalin didn't believe it. He worried that this might just be one of Hitler's misinformation tricks, and because of that suspicion, the Soviet Union made almost no serious preparations for war. Then, on June 22, 1941, the massive confrontation between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union officially began. At 3:30 a.m., along the German-Soviet border, Hitler ordered fighter planes to launch a sudden bombing attack deep into Soviet territory. The scene was lively. Someone asked, why is it so loud? Is there some kind of festival going on? The reply was, no sir, Hitler is attacking our territory. Stalin heard this and said, oh, the Hitler is attacking us festival? The Nazi attack came, completely without warning, while the Soviet Union was almost totally unprepared. The Red Army hadn't deployed yet, hadn't reacted in time, and couldn't counterattack properly. Someone screamed, "Why didn't you report this earlier, you idiot?" The answer came back calmly, "Sir, we did report it.
Nonsense.
You just didn't believe it." In just the first few hours, more than 1,200 Soviet fighter aircraft were destroyed right on the ground, before they ever had a chance to take off. The result: the Soviet Air Force was almost completely crippled. From that moment on, German forces gained total control of the skies. On the northern front, German troops quickly seized most of the smaller countries. In the Baltic region, The Soviet Red Army was repeatedly smashed, pushed back, and eventually forced toward the city of Leningrad. German forces immediately encircled the city. Leningrad was completely cut off from the rest of the Soviet Union. Hitler ordered a blockade of Leningrad lasting 871 days. No direct assault, no immediate occupation, just one simple plan: starve the city to death. A plan that was extremely cruel and one of the darkest chapters of the entire war. The consequences of the prolonged siege were horrific. More than 1 million civilians in Leningrad died from starvation and freezing. During the time the city was cut off, not because they lacked courage, but because there was simply nothing left to eat. The southern front, the Crimean Peninsula. In the south, German forces surged into the Crimean Peninsula with the objective of destroying the Soviet fleet. Facing this threat, Soviet units proactively organized defensive plans. The soldiers fought with extreme determination, resisting fiercely for every single meter of ground. However, despite this resistance, the Crimean Peninsula still fell on July 4, 1942. Even in defeat, these defensive efforts significantly slowed Hitler's quick victory strategy. And more importantly, they bought the Soviet Union precious time to mobilize reserve forces, reorganize the army, and prepare for a long and exhausting war ahead. The Central Front, the road to Moscow. In the central sector, this was the direct route to the capital, Moscow. And so, Germany concentrated its most elite forces to attack this direction. The fighting between the Soviet Red Army and German forces was extremely brutal, and in the early phase, the Red Army kept taking heavy losses. German troops pushed deep into Soviet territory and at one point came within about 300 kilometers of Moscow. That sounds close, but in Russia, 300 kilometers is still not the end of the line. In just 17 days, the Soviet Union lost 42,000 soldiers out of a total force of 62,500 on the Central Front. To put it bluntly, this was a real catastrophe for the Soviet Union. The general commanding the Central Front was summoned back to Moscow, and afterward, he was executed for incompetence. In the Soviet Union, this was considered a very decisive form of performance evaluation. By this point, Germany had occupied most of the western territories of the Soviet Union. Looking at the map, it looked very impressive. But there was one small problem. Hitler's quick victory plan was starting to push Nazi Germany beyond its limits. The reason was simple. The Soviet Union was enormous, so vast that you could take the land, sure, but holding it, that was exhausting. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union's military potential was something Germany couldn't accurately measure, even though over 1 million Soviet soldiers were lost in just the first month. The Red Army kept appearing like mushrooms after the rain. After securing the Belarus front, German forces concentrated their strength and pushed straight toward Moscow. But the deeper they advanced, the fiercer the resistance became. In the outskirts of Moscow, German troops and the Soviet Red Army were locked in a stalemate for nearly 2 months. And while German forces were starting to show signs of exhaustion, the Red Army's numbers kept growing without stopping. A very clear sign that this war was not going to end quickly, no matter what Hitler had imagined. Hitler gradually realized a harsh truth. The quick attack, quick victory plan was almost impossible. Moscow might look close on the map, but in reality, it was still painfully far away. And right at that moment, Hitler came up with an idea that he believed was absolutely brilliant. Hitler noticed that Soviet commanders were overly focused on defending Moscow, and as a result, had neglected defenses in the southern region. In other words, there was a massive gap. And Hitler saw it. Instead of continuing to throw everything at Moscow, Hitler decided to change the direction of attack. He secretly split his forces in two and redirected one group to strike straight at the city of Kyiv. The defensive line in this area was extremely thin. The result, Soviet forces were shattered. It didn't stop there. German troops pressed their advantage. and further split into two pincers, one advancing down from the north, the other pushing up from the south. The city of Kyiv was quickly, completely encircled. Meanwhile, the Soviet Red Army defending Moscow couldn't redeploy in time to provide relief. In short, the Soviet Union walked straight into Germany's trap. The consequence was devastating. All 65,000 Red Army soldiers on the southern front were wiped out. And on September 19, 1941, the city of Kyiv officially fell. And just like that, the first half of the match came to an end, with the Soviet Union suffering a heavy defeat at the hands of Nazi Germany. The victory at Kyiv had enormous significance for Nazi Germany's military and is often considered the most resounding victory of Hitler's entire command career. In other words, this was the highlight of his career. For the Soviet Union, however, the crushing defeat at Kyiv was a humiliation that was almost impossible to erase. The reasons behind this disastrous loss were clear: constant disagreements among Soviet commanders, slow and reactive decision-making, and by the time the Soviets began to regain control of the situation, it was already too late. However, despite the painful defeat, the Soviet Union's will to fight did not weaken. If anything, it grew even stronger. Soviet soldiers were no longer afraid of death, while on the German side, despite holding the advantage, losses were far from insignificant. The number of German soldiers and armored vehicles suffered serious attrition, and on top of that, the time Germany spent dealing with Kyiv, unintentionally, gave Moscow precious extra time to prepare its defenses for the second half of the match. After a long string of victories, Hitler became extremely full of himself. Too full of himself, if you ask Mr. Know-It-All. After that winning streak, Hitler grew arrogant and began to underestimate his opponent. But what Hitler never expected was this: the victory at Kyiv would be Nazi Germany's last victory in its confrontation with the Soviet Union. So what happens next? How will the balance of the war shift? Can Moscow hold out? And what price will Hitler pay for this overconfidence? All of that will continue in Round 2 of the Soviet-German showdown in the next part of World War II. And if you don't want to miss the biggest plot twist of the entire war, then subscribe to the World War History channel and let Mr. Know-It-All tell you the rest.